Hi, today we're looking at Akamai's App and API Protector. This is your one-stop shop for protecting websites, applications, and APIs. It includes everything from WAAP controls, Layer 7 DDoS protection, bot visibility and management, and API discovery. We're going to start by looking at our traffic profile in the Security Center. This is our high-level overview. It's the sort of thing that I would look at every morning while I grab my coffee. Here we can see our attack traffic, represented by the red line, overlaid with our total traffic on the platform, represented in blue. We can also filter by the type of attack traffic and adjust the time range. In addition, we have a quick summary of which host names are being protected and the tuning status for the policy that we're looking at. Next, let's take a look at some trends associated with individual segments of attack traffic. So if we go over to the left in our trends section, we're going to start in the web application firewall section. So here we can see a summary of our total WAF attack traffic. We can see it broken down by which WAF groups have been detected and which actions have been applied to these WAF attacks. We have a similar graph that overlays our attack traffic with the total traffic on the platform. We can see which groups have been detected, which firewall policies have been triggered. This one's really cool. We can see which individual APIs are being targeted by WAF attacks in addition to which host names. And finally, we can see a breakdown of which countries these attacks have originated from. And if we'd like a more granular report, we can filter on any of this data. Let's also take a look at the bot trends. In a similar fashion, here we can see a breakdown of our bot traffic summary, which bot types have been detected, which actions have been applied to those bots, and then the rest of this data is very similar. Attack traffic, types detected, which firewall policies have been triggered, APIs, host names, countries. So this is taking things one step deeper versus the previous screen we saw. So when we really want to start digging into what's going on in the platform and how App and API Protector is helping, these trends are really helpful. So now let's take this one step further. We've seen our trends, we've seen the high-level report, but what happens when we want to dig through our traffic with a fine-tooth comb? Well, that's what web security analytics is for. So here's where we can look at our attack traffic down to the individual request level. Right now, I've got things pulled up for the entire month of May and already see something very suspicious. It looks like there was a large bot attack earlier in May. So I'm going to zoom in on that and we're going to try to figure out what's going on. So sure enough, this is a very suspicious looking spike of traffic. It looks like most of it originated from bots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start building a report by adding each of these things to a filter. So let's say we'll look at all of our bot traffic. And from here, I want to start adding other elements to this report. So one of the first things I would look at is where's this attack traffic coming from? So if we go down to network info, we could see, well, what's the connecting country? And already this looks very distributed. This is a big list. So the next thing I'd look at is, well, what parts of my site are they actually hitting? So let's take a look at the path that these requests are going to. Very targeted. It looks like almost everything, at least from this attack, is hitting this topics.php page. So this feels like something that I want to mitigate in some way, but I need to figure out how I can identify this bot and make sure that I'm blocking that and none of my legitimate traffic. So let's take a look at the user agent this is coming from. So that's going to be in the HTTP info. We're going to add that to our report. We've got 6 different user agents that this is coming from. That's a start. I don't want to just blindly start blocking those. So the last thing I'd look at is there any sort of commonality that we could see with the TLS hash? This is a really powerful tool when it comes to bot mitigation. So if we look at our client info, look at the TLS hash, sure enough, this entire attack is coming from just 2 individual TLS fingerprints. So what we could do is use those to build a custom bot profile and take an action based on that. That could be something like denying the request outright. We could slow it down. We could tar pit it. In this case, I would probably either slow or tar pit so that I don't tip these bot operators off. In just a second, when we look at the configuration settings, we can see exactly how to do that. One other cool thing I've seen a lot of lately is using these analytics to gain insights into which AI engines are crawling your site. So to do that, I've pulled up a fresh report. We're looking at the last week's worth of data. I could build this in a really similar way to what I just did, where I start manually adding filters and widgets, but instead I'm going to use our new AI assistant. So in plain text, I can just ask it, show me all traffic coming from AI bot categories broken down by botnet ID and URL. And sure enough, that's exactly what it spit out. So we have a filter showing us only traffic coming from AI bots. Then we have it broken down by botnet ID and by URL. That was so easy. One last thing we could do, if we want to use a report like this over and over again, and this applies to everything in WSA, not just things generated by the AI assistant, we can deep link to these reports. So there's a copy view link button in the upper right-hand corner. Clicking that will generate a link that you could share with anyone within your organization. Earlier, I mentioned using WSA to drill down to the individual request level, and that's the last thing I want to show here before we move over to the configuration side of the house. So once again, I've pulled up a fresh report. This is the last week's worth of data, and this time I want to filter on WAF attacks. So here we're just looking at things that have triggered our WAF rules, and I also want to break this down by the attack group. In this case, I'm really curious. I want to look into SQL injection attacks. So I'm going to add that to my filter, and then I'm going to go up to this samples tab here. And this is where we've got the individual requests that have been triggering these rules. So this very first one here, you can see it was a GET request that hit the platform. There's a bunch of stuff in this query string. And down here, we can see the parts of that query string that triggered our rules engine that identified it as a SQL injection attack. Let's take a look at a couple more of these. We'll see what Taiwan's up to. So same thing here. You can see that there was a number of elements in that query string that triggered our detection engine. So in addition to being able to see exactly what rules were fired in the back end, we also have access to the request headers, the response headers, and all the client info. So this becomes an incredibly powerful tool when we really want to dig in and get into the nitty-gritty of where an attack's coming from, what it's doing behind the scenes, and what it's triggering on the Akamai side. Now we've moved over to the configuration side of the house. This is the policy that powered all of the analytics that we just got done looking at. From here, we can see which host names are covered by this policy, a list of tuning recommendations from Akamai, and all of the match targets that the different sections of this policy apply to. First up, we're going to take a look at the default section. So here we're in the default section of our policy. You can see the same website match target here, and these are really helpful for applying different rule sets or protections to different parts of your website or application. From here, we'll click into the DOS protection settings. Now, right off the bat, there's a number of layer 3, layer 4 protections that are just inherent to the platform, given that Akamai drops all traffic that doesn't come across port 80 or 443. In addition, this is where we set up rate limiting policies. We can get pretty granular by defining both a burst threshold and an average threshold that looks at requests over the course of a minute. Next, we'll look at the bot management settings. From here, we can see all of the different bot categories that we can interact with. Akamai bot categories are libraries that Akamai maintains of known bots. For example, AI bots, which is something that we looked at in the analytics section. You can see here's all the bots contained within this library. For each one of these categories, we can define a custom action, anything from deny to slow to tar pit. In addition to the Akamai bot categories, for any bots that aren't self-identifying, we have our transparent detections. So this is doing things like fingerprinting and request anomalies. And again, for each one of these sections, we can define a custom action for when a bot is detected. And finally, we have our custom bot categories. You remember when we were looking at that big volumetric bot attack earlier, we identified 2 different TLS fingerprints. We could come in here and use those to define our own bot and block based on that. The last thing I want to talk about is API protection. So now we're in the API discovery tool, and what this does is automatically detect API endpoints for any traffic flowing across the Akamai network. Once an endpoint's found, we get a sample of the traffic, a list of the methods used, the response codes, which user agents are hitting that API, and from there, we can register that API endpoint so that we can protect it with App and API Protector. So now that we have an API endpoint both discovered and registered on the platform, we're back in the security configuration where we can start enforcing request constraints. Let's see what that looks like for this authorization endpoint. So here we have the details for our authorization API, everything from the name, the base path, the URL, whether or not it's case sensitive. From there, we can decide whether or not to enforce request constraints and response constraints. After that, we can determine whether or not the API should allow undefined resources and which methods are allowed. Next up, we can define which request body content types are allowed and what the maximum values for those request body contents would be. And finally, for each individual method, we can start defining and enforcing both request parameters and the response parameters. So all of these things together add up to a really powerful tool to make sure that your APIs in the platform are being consumed in a way that they're supposed to and not being abused. So that's it for our App and API Protector demo. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and all of us here at Akamai are looking forward to talking more and answering any questions you might have.